So what's the big problem with wealth creation? How do people like us, who didn't inherit a boatload of money, who are investing and building wealth from our own blood, sweat and tears, how do we invest in a way that gives us remarkable results and become financially free before retirement age? I don't know about you, but I am sick of hearing from wealth gurus and experts who don't walk their own talk and prescribe strategies that are a one-size-fits-all approach. For self-made people like you and me, I'm here to tell you that you don't need to be superhuman or already wealthy to reach financial freedom earlier than 65. This is the Alternative Investing Podcast.
Hey guys, so great to have you with us again. I'm really excited about talking today about a specific metric that I think if you can wrap your head around this, it can have a massive influence on your financial success. Now, many people know that I'm a huge fan of going beyond simply measuring net worth as a metric or a key performance indicator of success and going much broader to come up with a series of metrics that help you understand how you are tracking as an investor. And the one that I specifically want to focus in on today is what I call lifestyle burn rate. Now, burn rate is a reference that's really come from the corporate world and is a reference to how quickly you're burning through cash and capital reserves. So similarly, in the context of lifestyle burn rate, my usage of this particular word is a reference to what percentage of your annual active income are you spending. Now, I want to kind of pull this apart a little bit, but where I actually want to start is I was listening the other day to a podcast by a really successful entrepreneur by the name of Alex Hormozi, who's quite a character, and I really love listening to some of his very polarizing advice. And he was describing his journey and describing a little bit of insight into how over, a decade of having gone from sleeping on the floor to banking multiple millions of dollars in cash after tax every month, how his living expenses have changed. And I found it fascinating because certainly he's someone who clearly values stewardship. He also clearly has a little bit of mental anguish around and fear around not having enough. So he described how when he first started his businesses, he was actually sleeping on the floor of the business in order to save rent. And, within a very short space of time, got to the point where he was banking over $1 million after tax per month. And when he describes from a lifestyle expenditure perspective what changed, the answer was not a whole lot. He continued to rent. He had no fancy car. He didn't actually buy a home until he had, I think he was describing $6 or $7 million in the bank. And he unapologetically describes that he values business success over money. And, he also acknowledges there's a little bit of a scarcity mindset that goes on. So he then goes on to describe, over the last few years, the decision to buy a home, then sell out of all material possessions, go back down to one car. Him and his wife are back to renting. So it's a really fascinating kind of case study, if you like, on extremism when it comes to lifestyle burn rate. Now, he pays a significant amount of money now towards rent, and he also spends a fair bit of money on private flights and restaurants. But outside of that, there's very little spent. There's no, lavish holidays, lavish cars, lavish houses. I think he's very clear from a money's values perspective that doesn't bring him any joy. Now, in my experience, if you have the luxury of a high income, then you've got the ability to pay less attention to your lifestyle burn rate. But if it's important to you to achieve stability and financial freedom sooner in life rather than in your kind of twilight years, if you like, then paying attention to this as a key metric is super important. So just a reminder, the lifestyle burn rate is essentially if you took your total household spendings, which are obviously after tax, and divided by your average household income after tax, that gives you your lifestyle burn rate. So if, for example, after tax, your household is generating $200,000 and, you're spending only half of that, you would have a 50% lifestyle burn rate. Now, everyone's got different life experiences, different burdens around the way that they live their life. And really what I'm advocating is that you bring a level of mindfulness to this number. There's no right or wrong, there's no good or bad. But essentially, if you want to create wealth and you don't have the luxury of having been handed a whole lot of capital from wherever, or you don't win the lotto, you've got to generate it yourself. And so that capacity to set aside money for investing, to fuel your investing, is really fundamental and crucial. And so I like the idea that if you're not so much trying to kind of compare against anybody else, but set the bar and then watch how that bar shifts over time, I think that's a pretty good way to approach this idea of, is it where you want it to be? Is it moving in the right or the wrong direction? Now, the question that I have explored with a lot of people is why their lifestyle burn rate has significantly increased over time. And I think the answer for most people is it's been subconscious. I think particularly for entrepreneurs who work really hard, when the profits, when the dividends finally start to arrive, there's almost this feeling of deep-seated, I deserve to spend more. This is all colored, of course, by the fact that the person that you choose to have as your life partner, if you have a life partner, can, and their habits around money can also be a great shaper of what happens to your lifestyle burn rate. And that's why, and I've spent time talking about this in the past, the closer you and your life partner can get on the topic of what matters, money values and things like that, the faster you are going to get to your desired outcome. I think what I've witnessed many times is where two people in a relationship are on completely different pages with different values and different expectations, then it's really, really hard to get where you want to go. An example of this is I've had a long-term client now who has worked so hard in his business, and his wife is someone who not only has very little interest in money, but doesn't necessarily appreciate the pressure that he's under. She works part-time. She doesn't get paid a whole lot of money. And her experience of money is that it shows up when needed. So there's no challenge from her point of view around booking very expensive holidays, wanting to live in a very lavish house, and the list goes on and on. Now, because of the fact that they're not really on the same page with this, he's really had to be incredibly creative about how he creates fuel for investing. And to be frank, it hasn't been that easy. And so, that's just a common example of why this lifestyle burn rate is worth looking at, not only from the viewpoint of what is the number, but how has it come to be at the level that it's at? And is there any wriggle room to improve it? Is there any need to improve it? Now, look, if you're someone, as I said before, who earns a squillion, where there's just so much money left over to fuel investing, you can have your apple pie and eat it too, then, power to you. But for the majority of people, we have to remember why we're investing. The reason we're investing is we want to take $1 out of our pocket today and try to grow it for tomorrow. So we're looking after our future selves. What I love about investing, and particularly alternative investing, is it creates that runway to replacing your primary income. And obviously, the longer the runway, the higher your lifestyle burn rate can afford to be. But if you're someone who just wants to knuckle down and get where you want to go, then it's super important that you give this some attention. Now, one of the things you could start as an exercise is, what is that number? So once you understand that number, then it's a case of pulling it apart. If you were to articulate the difference between discretionary and non-discretionary income, obviously life is getting more expensive, mortgages are getting more expensive, food and groceries are getting more expensive, but I would argue that there's limited discretion around how you control that level of spending. But on the flip side, there can be massive financial and money leaks that come from just mindlessly purchasing and, spending money without properly allocating capital. And in the same way that when we invest, we talk about capital allocations across asset classes, we make detailed plans about what we're going to buy and when and what impact that's going to have. What we need to do is actually drill down into our day-to-day spendings and work out what are our values, what are we consciously spending on, and what are we and I think the word is opportunistic or impulse spending on. And once you've got a handle on that, then you can actually put some spanks in place. And if you haven't already, go and look for my podcast on YouTube or my video on YouTube talking about guerrilla tactics around money management. I think the capacity to fulfill your lifestyle needs is important. But I also think that, there's a huge proportion of people who will spend tens of thousands of dollars on items that they didn't really need or didn't realize were costing them so much. So I think to some degree for most people, there's always, a level of compromise that's required. If you want to invest in assets that will grow over time, if you want to invest in your future self, there's got to be a level of reasonable compromise in lifestyle to achieve both. And, I think part of this game is really around working out, from an experiential or monetary perspective, what are the things that bring you the most joy, making sure you allocate funds for those things, and then being really vigilant about setting aside the money to invest. And, there's so many books on this stuff, but one of the best books that I read when I was quite young was The Richest Man in Babylon, which I'm sure many of you have either read or come across. It's a fabulous book to give a teenager, and it's certainly one that I've read and reread as an adult. And this idea of pay yourself first is really a reference to set aside the money that will fuel your overall wealth and future care for yourself first, and then worry about what's left to spend rather than the other way around. So rather than kind of getting embroiled in the idea of deep budgeting and allocating $2 to a coffee here and, $10 to a cocktail there, I think what you're better off doing is allocating at the highest level how much needs to go into this, that, and the other, and then just automating the management of those buckets. So what I see in terms of value when it comes to tracking is an observation of, and I'm not suggesting that you track this, by the way, month to month. What I'm suggesting is that, it could be part of your new financial year housekeeping. You kind of analyze what is our lifestyle burn rate, and then you check it every 12 months. And, what a lot of people don't notice is the conscious and unconscious creep that can happen in that metric. So the reason that lifestyle burn rate matters is what I've seen far too often is people squirrel and save and try and invest when they can least afford it. And then as their lifestyle improves and they can afford to set aside larger lump sums of capital to fuel their investing, they stop doing that because they're a little worn out and they want to spend the money, which is completely understandable. But just never lose sight of the long game. And I think, if you can just track this one metric as frequently or as infrequently as you like, but at least annually, you're going to start to see some really interesting, insights into what's happening in your financial household, how that's influencing your results, and potentially give you some, impetus to just do a deeper analysis and figure out, what can be done about it or what can't be done about it. So anyway, guys, this is going to be one of those short, sweet podcasts. I hope you found this useful. I really encourage you at every level of your journey, whether you're a newbie investor or a high net worth, serious professional investor, to continue to monitor and track what is happening with your lifestyle burn rate. Till next time, take care.
You've been listening to the Alternative Investing Podcast. If you're feeling frustrated that despite doing everything right in the property investing playbook and you're no closer to financial freedom, then head on over to incosiwealth.com to learn more about how you can use alternative investments to catapult your investing income and blend strategies to shave decades off your timeline to financial freedom. See you on the next episode.